It's the Indie Review Show.
That's right. And I noticed that Frank mentioned the final countdown, which of course makes me think of the final countdown, which makes me very excited. Say the word bazinga tonight. Oh, why? Why, Jim? Why? Well, you made it happen. Good job, Jim. All right, should we hop in our intro?
Yes, let's do it. I am Corey Kerr.
And I'm Joshua Kemble.
And this is the Indie Review Show.
This is the series where we review the best of indie comics and other media like movies, TV, cartoons, books, and did we mention comics?
The idea is that we're pulling back the curtains on our inspirations. Josh and I have been professional illustrators, cartoonists, animators, graphic designers, and we've taught at the college level. We're getting into the things that inspire us.
Yes, and today, I guess we'll do plugs, but I'm really excited about today's thing. You could say I have like a personal connection to the cartoonist.
Oh, well, that's cool. Yeah. So, do you want to go first?
Sure. Actually, it's better if I go second.
Okay.
With my setup. Sorry.
All right.
Where can everybody find your stuff, and what should they get?
You can find my stuff at CoreyKerr.com. And if you go to CoreyKerr.com, you will see all kinds of fun things. But I just released a brand new animation, just a little short looping animation for Wacom, my third Wacom animation for them. And that is on Instagram exclusively right now. And then I'll release it on other places later. So if you want to go check that out, you can go to CoreyKerr.com, CoreyKerr.com/online. You'll see all the different things that you can do. One of those would be Instagram. So you can check that out. Josh, where can we find your stuff?
Can you see me okay?
Sorry
if that made a ton of noise. There ended up being a lot of Legos in spots there shouldn't have been, thus having a kid. So you can check out my stuff at joshuakemble.com. And if you haven't yet, you should pick up a copy of Two Stories, which was my book about faith and mental illness that I hand write, hand letter, and hand ink. And actually, a lot of the panel layouts are very influenced by the work that we're going to be looking at today, although they're probably not quite as advanced and inventive. So, yeah. So this you can get on Amazon.com for like a really discounted rate right now. And that's my stuff.
Cool.
All right. And if you hear weird noises, just give me a heads up, Corey, because some stuff's happening with this space.
Sounds good. I'm going to mute myself because I've got people above me apparently having a wrestling match in the kitchen. So,
all right. So, let me get into this. So our book today is Krazy Kat. It's Krazy and Ignatz, edited by Bill Blackbeard. And this is the particular book of 1925 to 1926. And it does have like a little subtitle. There is a happy land fur away. And if this cover looks familiar, like the graphic design, you're like, that's a pretty awesome graphic design. That's because Chris Ware did all of the book design and as well as the covers. For all of these are books that prior to this, the collections of Krazy Kat that had come out, and we'll get into it a little bit, only went up to 1924 for comprehensive collections. And so this is the, like Fantagraphics decided to publish from 1925 on. And then they also have a separate collection of like the wide strips. And I'll probably be showing these scattered throughout different indie review shows because I feel like Herriman, I know I've done a couple of McKay, but George Herriman's like one of the guys that like I think most cartoonists should know about. So yeah, so there's that. So okay, also I'm going to review this in a bit of a different format than the way we usually do, because this isn't a sequential narrative where like there's a through line that's like kind of continuing and advancing a story that changes a lot. The story is actually really unique. And I think one of the reasons it has a lot of impact is the fact that it literally uses the same premise every strip, but it says these really profound things like within those repetitions of the same premise. So, okay. I am going to use a little bit of Wikipedia too, just to kind of give you guys like a broad overview of Herriman, because I was taking notes and I was like, I think it would actually be better to mention what Wikipedia has to say on it. So if you guys have like time, maybe like kick Wikipedia $1 or $2. I know every time we go on Wikipedia looking for information, that annoying thing pops up where it's like, hey, enjoying this free content, kick us some money. Well, if you enjoy this free content, kick them some money. Okay, so Krazy Kat. Oh, and Corey, I know you're on mute, but I do want to make sure I'm still running here. Are you still there?
Yeah, you're great. It's working.
Okay,
great. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. All right. So Krazy Kat, also known as Krazy and Ignatz in some of the reprints, is an American newspaper comic strip by George Herriman, the cartoonist, and it ran from 1913 to 1944. So that's 31 years. And it first appeared in the New York Evening Journal, whose owner, and this will be familiar with you guys like from our McKay episodes, William Randolph Hearst, our good old crazy billionaire, who liked cartoons and also blacklisted Winsor McKay, was a major booster for the strip throughout its run. And people have had trouble figuring that out. For some reason, Herriman was like Hearst's favorite, one of his favorite cartoonists. And no matter like if people sent him hate mail or like tried to get the guy canceled, or like the strip, even when it got older and people were saying it was passe, like Hearst just kind of saw the genius behind it and just continually wanted to see Krazy Kat. Even when he was canceling like full page strips, Krazy Kat like just always kind of ended up there in the golden seat. The characters had been introduced previously, so the characters, it's Krazy Kat and Ignatz the Mouse. Those are the two main characters, and they were introduced as part of a smaller sides. They were it was like a little bottom scrolling strip. Have you ever seen those? Where like in the Sunday comics, like you have the main strip and then you have like a little gag strip running underneath it. So it was introduced like that by in a strip called the Dingbat Family. And in that, basically the phrase Krazy Kat originated because there was like, as a side gag, there was this cat and mouse that were neighbors that used to feud. And so you'd kind of hear that. I'm hearing a lot of slapback too. I'm not really sure what that is, just so you know. The locations you're going to see in this book are all in Cochino County, Arizona. And you're going to notice that it mixes offbeat surrealism, playfulness, and like poetic, idiosyncratic language. And that's kind of what makes people such huge fans of the work. So, yeah. So, so anyhow, yeah, that's pretty much the early run-in with it. So, running through it. So this is a beautiful book design. I'll just say that right off the bat. Like one of my favorite things about these collections, particularly these ones from Fantagraphics, again, is just like Chris Ware's aesthetic, but also you notice that he like kind of totally honors the beautiful language of Krazy Kat. And I also like that he does things that are like design nerd things. Like there's this little indicator to turn the book over with this little arrow. Mm-hmm. So if you follow that and then you flip it, it's a background that's upside down. And it's like that kind of little detail, like only a crazy graphic designer would notice, you know? But I love that kind of stuff. Like I know it's nerdy, but that's like one of the things I love about Chris Ware's graphic design. So I think just for and it's always printed on these beautiful French paper too, which is just like, it feels good, you know, like the texture of it. I always want to mention the print quality on a really good printed book too. And apparently like we have a link on the IRS agency site where you can pick up books like this, but I think this has accrued in value quite a bit since I picked it up, because I saw it like running for like $80 or $100. I think the lowest price is like $40 because I think it's out of print. But anyhow, I do think if you don't catch it used or like it can't find it for a good deal, then maybe email Fantagraphics and just say reprint this edition. That would be I think a good thing. So, okay, we have this beautiful, again, just really amazing graphic design where, Ware knows how to even use the gutter in a great way. I love his graphic design. Sorry, just gushing about that. That's what I'll do the whole review on. Okay, so now we have like this intro, and I'll just kind of go through a little bit of it. So prior to this series, there weren't a lot of collections available. I kind of mentioned that. People had disregarded Krazy Kat like in history, which is really strange because at the time it was so admired. But just for some reason, it's not taught in a lot of like literary or art classes, and probably because it's a comic book, right? So let's see. Oh, like I said about Hearst, he used to get hate mail about this comic. Like people just didn't understand like the way that that Herriman writes dialogue reads really clearly, but he just plays so much with vernacular and language that there were a lot of people, like kind of the lowest common denominator, who didn't understand it and didn't like it and hated it because they just were like, why are you printing this thing where people talk all weird and it's this cat and mouse and it's the same plot every week, right? But Hearst's protection, and there's like multiple letters. Like I said, this is one of the rare occasions where Hearst like just picked this artist. He was just like, this guy is my guy. And it's baffling to most people why. Not that he wasn't a genius. It's just Hearst hired a lot of geniuses, you know?
Yeah.
But anyhow.
And wasn't known as a champion of the underdog.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a weird thing, but I think he saw the genius of this, or there was something about it, or maybe Hearst had, some dark secrets. I mean, not Hearst, but Herriman had some dark secrets on Hearst. But anyhow, so the nice thing is, though, the fans at the time were people like Gertrude Stein. These are all people who wrote about it being either an influence or one of their favorite works of literature and art. Gertrude Stein, Ernest Hemingway, Pablo Picasso, Gilbert Seldes, H.L. Mencken, Edmund Wilson, E. Cummings, and T.S. Eliot. So pretty like heavy hitting influences. Also, strangely, I think he influenced a little bit of Dali's work. And there's that too. So woohoo. We went over this last time. Like, this isn't quite like the McKay books, where it's definitely not going to have it's not going to have as much biography in it. And I'm going to be going over other George Herriman stuff like later on, because I have bigger collections and stuff. But this is just a good intro, I think. So just needless to say, though, in his lifetime, like if you guys go back to the Winsor McKay episode 2, you'll see there's this era where cartoonists were like rock stars. And so he'd get hired to do like a review of The Gold Rush by Charlie Chaplin, And actually what's interesting is this whole thing is sort of a joke about reviews and how useless reviewers are. And then at the end, he basically talks about, let's see, what was it? Yeah, so you're saying, let all the cobblers of fashion flat shoes all awry, and all the tailors trim trousers as loose as gunny sacks. Put all the reeds of the world into canes, and let the hatter go mad making derbies. Then pour them into the genius of another Chaplin. So that's his way of saying he liked Charlie Chaplin. But anyhow, he was a bit of a celebrity, even though like his strip wasn't always like the hottest newspaper strip at the time. This was the scale he worked at, like a sample. It obviously worked at a large scale. And he also had this tendency, and I thought this was an interesting note for those of us who are, process nerds. He actually used to knife out his errors, and he barely penciled any of his work. So a lot of this has like the minimum of pencil underneath. And then it's just mostly ink. So he's letting the ink do most of the work. And then, if he messed up on the inks, like he would literally like knife it out, like scrape it with like an X-Acto knife.
It amazes me how much craft people cared about with such low resolution print quality.
Yeah.
Back in the day. And it really comes through. A lot of people, I think nowadays, with digital and everything else, they just kind of, I don't know. They wouldn't take the time to knife something out,
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Interesting.
So there's some other obvious things. I mean, there's a mouse in this, and this definitely predates Mickey Mouse. So that's something to consider when you're looking at Krazy Kat. Another thing to consider is like, if you've ever seen like Mutt and Jeff or Calvin and Hobbes, you're going to notice a lot of similarities in layout, and just realize like all those artists look at Herriman, like they were widely influenced by him. This was one of the artists actually before finding McKay. When Calvin and Hobbes was being made, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes stumbled upon a whole treasure trove of like what I'll show at some other time, but it's like George Herriman's color strips, and the layouts of those mixed with like Little Nemo and Slumberland were why he started sort of, I think within his first year or two of running Calvin and Hobbes, doing those like wider, taller strips with a little more creative paneling.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Those were direct influences from Krazy Kat. So let's get into it. So I'm not going to get into too much of the plot. I might start with just one, just to kind of give people a premise that's going to continue and be reused in like a million brilliant ways. So one thing you're going to see is Cocochino County, Arizona, and Monument Valley, like used a lot in backgrounds. And if these feel kind of like Looney Tunes backgrounds, it's because Chuck Jones actually was a huge fan of Krazy Kat, and part of the inspiration for Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, those cartoons and those backgrounds and having it in that crazy desert, were Krazy Kat. So just another thing to kind of keep in mind. So he's obsessed with Monument Valley. Cocochino Valley is the location they live. You're going to see recurrent characters. There's this dude who you're going to see here. He's like a little, let me see if I can kind of pull it a little closer. So he is Officer Pup right here. He has like a bandage. And then you have Krazy Kat, who right here is actually covered in a blanket. And then you have Ignatz, who's this little dude. He's a little mouse. And actually there's a comics award that's named after him called the Ignatz Award for SPX, I think, the convention. But anyhow, so here's your big premise. Officer Pup is always trying to stop. It's very simple. Officer Pup loves Krazy Kat. He just thinks Krazy Kat is like the sweetest dude in the world. Krazy Kat is really sweet. He just kind of loves everyone and he's clueless, right? Ignatz has a really quick temper and wants to pretty much hurt Krazy Kat. So he's always trying to beam Krazy Kat with a brick. Like his goal in life as a little mouse is to just lob this brick at Krazy Kat's head. And then the goal of Officer Pup is always to arrest Ignatz before he can lob a brick at Krazy Kat. And then Ignatz is always trying to avoid Officer Pup, who's always trying to arrest. So it's like this love triangle. And it goes all of these crazy awesome directions. But one thing to also just note is just like the expertise in panel layout. And you're going to see this throughout too. A lot of this is just going to be us looking at visuals. And then I think before I go into a lot, I'm going to pick one or two of these to actually read through just one whole page, because the other thing that is just so lovable about these is the playing with language and the use of language that Herriman employs. You know, it just gets so absolutely crazy. So like the way that he'll play with grammar and kind of mess with like the spelling and pronunciation of things. So
I noticed that he's spelling things with K's a couple years before Mortal Kombat made it cool.
yes, and that's a very George Herriman thing. The funny thing is, the only thing that has a k sound that he doesn't spell with K is Cocachino County, and that's it. That everything else is K's. But he'll also mess with a lot of spelling. So here is like, you know, like 1925. They're regretting all of their things. Offisa Pup is regretting that he bought a nightstick. That's from 1924. Ignatz is regretting his brick. That's a 1924 brick, but it's 1925. So he gets rid of his nightstick. Ignatz gets rid of his brick. And let me just read a little bit of the language, and then we can just kind of, I think, explore kind of some of the visual and the layout and the ink work and stuff. Because the premise is really simple. But I do want to say the complexity and the stories and how far he goes with this sort of repeated thing makes it more like instead of a plot device, it's more like a Waiting for Godot kind of scenario, where it's a bland scenario that just recycles, but there's a bunch of existentialism that like flows throughout it. It gets into deep psychological ideas and philosophy. And then sometimes it'll just be straight gags, but the amount of like 30 years worth of playing with this same premise, and it never really repeats the same direction or the same approach. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's one of the things it's pretty great. So, okay. So let's read just a little bit of the language here. I'm going to have to get a little closer to it. So here he's saying, just a little old last year's club, a 1924 model, and it's now 1925. And here he's saying, me, a mouse, used only last minute stuff with a 1924 model brick. 'Twon't do. Phooey on such an old style club. By the way, this is way before there was a well-known character who'd use words like phooey. Me to the clubbery to get a new 1925 model club, as benefits up-to-date cops like me. A 1925 model brick for me before I do another day's brick tossing. Then he stumbles upon Krazy Kat, and Ignatz is like, So he goes, come here. What if you are a 1924 model? You're still a brick. Pow. And you can at least give me a 1925 model thrill. Come back to Papa, you old darling. A 1930 model joy, I calls it. And he just lobs the nightstick at Ignatz. And then all's pretty good after all. He's leading him away to jail. And there's a happy lend fur away. So all of the language just gets more and more playful. And by the way, I just love the cartooning of this mouse. Like, let me see if I can kind of, I don't know, that's kind of blurring, huh?
Yeah, it might be a little too small for the camera. It's a really cute mouse, is all I'm saying. Very, very fine details, and like what he pulls off with like a very loose line is pretty amazing. So, okay. At last, I am free of the clutches of Cullen Kelly, who's this character. I have here in this house an inexhaustible supply of bricks to nick that cat's noodle with. So it's like a lot of playful language. It's kind of weird. And let's just kind of look at the layouts and sort of dynamics of like the way these pages are set up. So basically, like, you know, you have these open
spaces with like panels of multiple sizes, but they're very balanced and it's very easy to read the flow of. Playing with like empty white space. Here it's like this beautiful texture, right? A nice wide shot that leads to a smaller wide shot that leads to like these smaller panels. Just the layout of these panels, considering this is like 1925, I think are very impressive.
Yeah. And he's probably, along with Winsor McCay, like inventing a lot of the language that we just take for granted as far as like visual layout at this point.
Yeah, yeah. And I would also say, unlike Winsor McCay, his lettering is actually quite impressive for comic book lettering at the time. If you look at a lot of the comics published around this time, they just didn't have this clean of lettering. Even though it's loose. I also just, the ink work and the kind of beauty with which he can do just like these almost scribbled things with a quill. I absolutely adore it. Where it's like the most minimal of detail, but just enough to kind of see the movement of the characters.
Yeah.
And you'll see that mimicked a lot later on in Sunday Comics. So all of the premises just get more and more silly. Like Ignatz hides in a wishing well, and then he's waiting there hoping that Krazy Kat comes to make a wish so he can beam him with a brick. Officer Pup gets there and he's wishing that Krazy Kat would get here as well. And then basically he also wishes that then Ignatz comes, and Krazy Kat comes, and then he wishes that Ignatz was there because he's in love with Ignatz. And then this crazy like flying vehicle equivalent to like one of Corey's music videos with an anchor comes and just pulls the wishing well and reveals Ignatz, who then gets arrested.
What?
So we're going to see this kind of repeat throughout. Like there's, Ignatz is always getting chased by Officer Pup. In this one, Ignatz kind of like a stork flies in the brick, but it looks like a baby and he flies it like wrapped in there. So Officer Pup thinks it's, he's had a child. And so he's like carrying the brick wrapped in like this blanket going rockabye baby, like pretending it's a baby. And Officer Pup's like, the rascal, as much as I dislike him, I must admit he's got a nice maternal sort of soul. And of course he unwraps it, reveals it's a brick. Boom, pow, gets Krazy Kat. And the funny thing is, Krazy Kat, this is the other catch. Krazy Kat likes getting hit by the brick. That's the strange part of their friendship. So he actually thinks that the brick is like a kiss, like it's like the language of love from the mouse that he loves so much. So even here he says, little darling never forgets. So yeah. And then here Officer Pup, clueless, is like, I wonder if it's a boy or a girl. So they will play that premise just to the ends of the earth, but also notice these crazy backgrounds. Like it definitely has like this landscape of Arizona, and you can definitely see that influence, especially when, in later ones when I get to show like the color versions. I think you'll really see the use of landscape. But I mean, some of these layouts like this, I could almost view like, I mean, that looks like a Dave Sim page, Yeah. And I mean, this is 1925 and Dave Sim wasn't making work like that till, the late 80s. But I just love the clean layout. Here he just abandons all borders.
Yeah.
Again, like this seems not super impressive. I think especially because we've seen this with Calvin and Hobbes, right?
Yeah, but in this, there's an implied line with the flattening of the balloons.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting because the alignment and the shape of that, you see the borders, even though there are no panel borders.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
And also he's leaving enough space so it doesn't create like if you leave negative space where it doesn't flow where you want it to flow,
yeah,
it can kind of create these almost like Tetris blockades that you don't want as a designer. But these are beautifully designed pages. I just like, to me, actually, this one I would probably like. I might even rip this one off at some point because I love that with the full bleed at the top, wide angle shot.
Yeah,
very nice. Again, like the premises are so funny. I mean, here they're, hiding, trying to avoid the rain, and Ignatz is flying in a balloon to drop a brick on Krazy Kat, and he gets lightning strikes the balloon. And of course, he falls right in front of Officer Pup, who then walks him away. You're no April shower, you're an April fool, moosh. It also has just a ton of its own language, but there's also these great, funny characters.
Is there any indication of how he did that lightning bolt?
It's the lightning bolts is
it like a hard edge along those?
Yeah, it's just a hard edge with cross hatching across, and then it looks like he might have scraped away some of the lines here.
Yeah, that's cool.
And here too, it looks like that scratch technique.
Yeah, very few people nowadays use a razor blade in their inking. That's interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
That's fascinating. And honestly, I think this is the majority of the rest of this is just going to be looking at the pages because I think you guys get the premise. I guess like just to show maybe one more premise. So this is the old water hose gag where, he's trying to water his plant. It's clearly dying. And he's just like, what? It's a drought. Instead of a drought, he just has to say drought. And then you see Ignatz like, oh crap. He's caught by the cop. Wow, Mouse, got any bricks on your hip today, eh? No, Officer Pup, I have not. Wow. So good you didn't, or I'd tweak that ugly beezer of yours good and plenty, savvy? I just love the language of these old things.
Yeah.
So then he goes back over here. Can't understand what, Krazy, because he's like, I can't seem to understand it. He's looking at it again. The dry spell. What suddenly got amongst this hose? Yeah, let's see. Look. Gets him. And so on.
Yeah.
So there's on-running gags with that thing, but I think just in general, looking at these different layouts should hopefully like pique people's interest a little bit. Let me see if it does that come across better. Can you read it better that way?
I can see it just fine. It's so small.
Yeah.
Just because he draws his characters really, really tiny.
Yeah, I mean it's a book to own.
Right.
But it is very like microscopic. Like the way he draws Ignatz is like this tiny, tiny little fragile character. But it's just these beautiful lines. This is a really good layout too, where it goes from 2 without panel borders, but like you said, the balloons are lining up. Mm-hmm. So we're not super confused by it, to a wide shot. And I think this was ripped pretty directly by Calvin and Hobbes, this layout, where it has a wide inside.
Yeah.
And then it goes to 3 without panel borders, and then a wide with like 2 in the center. And it just, I mean, that's just a beautiful looking page,
Yeah. That's really cool.
Here we have a seesaw game that, will likely end with a brick. And it turns out it's just Ignatz using the seesaw to beam him on the head. Ignatz is a turd. Like, that's the great thing about him as a character.
So Gary Hodges is wondering, how large were his original pages? And was this printed as a full page in the newspaper?
Yeah, these were full pages, and I think I can't guess how wide the originals were. I would imagine. I mean, I think at the black and white era they might have been smaller, but I could definitely imagine probably somewhere around. I'm speculating here, but I would say possibly somewhere around the size of Little Nemo. It would be fun to see these at scale, you know.
Yeah. So I mean, they were full tabloid size comics.
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, yeah.
Yeah, that's huge.
So these are, I mean, just the inventiveness of these layouts, and just remembering that, you know, prior to Calvin and Hobbes, like what Sunday comics look like, and also just considering, I mean, you know, like Will Eisner from The Spirit, like would later look at stuff like this too, you know, for his layouts. And
right.
it's like, it definitely shows. And then there's stuff like this, like a classic grid. But what's shocking to me is how rare this is, because this was pretty standard format at the time. Like if you had a big page, you wouldn't even put spaces. But even to do things like this, where you don't have it go all the way to the edge, like it's a little, you leave negative space on the sides. That was a very kind of revolutionary thing, you know. It's like an art form people forgot. So you also just have these fun, crazy landscapes, beautiful characters, and definitely, like, the other thing I love about Herriman is, like, there's no mistaking his style or his line. It's just so specifically unique. I'm going to move in just a little bit. This is the same issue I have trying to sell a black and white book online. Getting a black and white to translate is kind of a difficult one. Like with a lot of fine hatching, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to kind of go through and show a little bit of these crazy, awesome layouts. And just, to me, I think it's really impressive the amount of mileage from that same bit.
Yeah.
You know?
And
every time he throws the brick, it says zip. When he gets hit, it always says pow.
Yeah, and like speed lines, that's got to be an innovation as well.
Yeah,
like a lot of the stuff that we take a look at nowadays, you know, having a squiggly line above somebody's head meaning that they're angry, or a fly flying around something meaning that it smells, you know, speed lines, things like that. Like at some point in time, that wasn't codified in our visual kind of lexicon as something that made sense, and then people did it, and it started to develop.
Yeah, I have no idea what that's like. Banding. It's interesting. But yeah, it's pretty impressive. Also, just to me, the looseness of the ink, like, it really does show that he was doing a lot of the drawing, just direct, you know, with very small amounts of information, which takes a lot of confidence as an artist to be able to, like, actually, a good practice for anybody out there would be to try to do a really good Ignatz, like mimicking this style.
Yeah.
It's remarkably hard, because if you just kind of copy it, it misses all the little nuances of like the thick and thin of the line. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you have to draw them quick, and you have to know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
So here's just a bunch of more crazy premises, and they all take place in these insane landscapes. You know, here you have a cow that's messing with Ignatz. and more just kind of absurd premises. A waterfall gag. And I just like, I have to say, I just absolutely adore this strip. The way that it plays with, yeah, I mean, the way that it plays with language, the way that it plays with just crazy experimental layouts for the time.
Yeah.
Minimal detail, but still like just a perfect variety of detail.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I think a lot of people don't give enough credit to like early inkers. You know, I mean, like pen and ink used to be, because photography was not something that was really ubiquitous until almost into the 50s in print and advertising and things like that.
Yeah.
And so that type, I mean, the idea of like the nib and the brush, I mean, that was a significant portion of the printed material when it came to visuals back in the day. And there's a lot of different techniques being employed here. But it was kind of rare. Like you were saying that people are, are kind of crazy celebrities and stuff like that. Like it takes a lot of effort to get that point. I mean, there's jokes nowadays where they'll quote an old quote from Norman Rockwell saying, there's more illustration work out there than there are illustrators to do it. It's like the most lucrative career you can get into. And that was decades after this. But I mean, I have an old out of print pen and ink book that just goes through, a lot of the main pen and ink people in the 20s, 30s, and you can see a lot of these techniques and stuff in there. It's just, I mean, like if you look at that top middle panel on the left page, and then you look down to the left in that second row, the sky is incredible. Like if you're thinking about like what's going on there, it's literally just small, thinly weighted lines, and it feels like movement. Like you can see like texture in the sky, and you can see clouds, and you can see like, if you were to leave the camera shutter open and watch the starry night, pass over time. I mean, it has that kind of effect.
Yeah.
And all of that type of like observation is really just beautiful texture and ambience to kind of the scene of what's going on.
Yeah.
I think people get instinctively, but miss maybe on a conscious level.
Yeah, 100%. The even like decisions like to just kind of leave this whole space white and then have it contrasted with this like heavy textured hatching, just for the composition. That's so smart. The other thing, this page kills me. Like, I know it's subtle, but doing something like, again, you're not lining up everything in a perfect grid. Like this goes further than a lot of McKay's stuff. I know it's weird, but it's like he chooses to push in the center panels just because they look better that way. Creates like legs and it creates weight.
Well, but as he's pushing it in,
yeah,
the camera is moving to the right and changing angle.
Exactly.
And so the movement of the panel also helps us get a feel for like, it's the same building. You can see the window, but we're looking at the other side of this building.
Yeah. And I just absolutely adore the fact that he chose to leave these panelless. And again, you'll see this kind of device mimicked by Calvin and Hobbes years later. And, to much praise by people. But again, Herriman was just like way ahead of his time in paneling. I know this is subtle, but it's like things like this I want to remember to do in comics. You know? You can do that. It doesn't have to be a straight grid. And it also doesn't have to be like gridless. Just doing something like shoving the inner panels in, having a thin here, getting rid of panel borders is just brilliant. But it also pushes the narrative. And you're right, it also kind of reinforces the height of these buildings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, beautiful landscape. art. It's just a lot of this stuff is like very beautiful, like sketch work, you know?
Yeah.
And I love the looseness of it. It's hard to mimic this kind of thing. So we'll just kind of look through, but as I'm going through, you're going to see panels, and a lot of these are going to feel like Looney Tunes, which didn't exist yet, Calvin and Hobbes, which didn't exist yet, a lot of modern independent comics, which didn't exist yet, you know. Here's a giant Ignatz in a dream. Because like I said, Krazy Kat really likes getting beamed by bricks. So here, his ultimate dream is like a brick that's big enough to murder him.
Yeah, you can see a lot of Dolly in that too.
Oh yeah, and Dolly loved this strip. So, and you can see why, like these crazy desert landscapes. A lot of people hadn't been to Arizona really at the time either. And
yeah, so, like Monument National Park, I mean, before World War II was pretty difficult to get to because there wasn't like a national freeway system, you know. And so like I remember my grandpa talking about driving back in the day, and it was like if you were going through Nevada or Arizona or wherever, I mean, it was like, you know, 45 miles an hour, you know, on tiny little roads. There was no interstate. And so to get there, it was a bit of a mecca, a bit of a journey. So this would have just looked surreal to a lot of people because they've never seen the red rocks and that type of thing.
So another thing to keep in mind too is this is pre-Tom and Jerry, right? This is before the whole cat mouse thing, which is now cliche, right? So like this mouse trying to murder this cat. This is before Itchy and Scratchy, which I feel was kind of a bit of an homage to this, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, this is before Spy versus Spy. So it's like having just this mouse do something like set up a cannon, you know, and just he's got a match and he's so excited to just shoot this cannon. And what's in the cannon? A brick, right? And he's just he actually, it looks like an accident that it's pointed up, but that actually is going to fly in the air and happen to hit Ignatz right on the head.
That's funny.
So it's like bits like that too, like that visual vocabulary, the cat and mouse chase, all of that didn't exist. This is the book that kind of made that.
You're a little out of frame. Will you move it up?
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
So this is asbestos. And there's a clock. Walking. So we're seeing behind, it's like a curtain opens, right? Krazy walks by. An alarm clock walks by. A brick flies by. Kills me. Anyhow, Ignatz walks by. The clock walks back. Offisa Pup, and then Kurt. Okay. So it's like I would want to like pontificate more about just like the strength of the line art, the play of the vocabulary, the fun of reading these books, but I can also just say, I guess I just want to say these are books cartoonists should own for the history of it, for the inspiration of it, like for the breadth of knowledge that was kind of displayed in the past that we can learn from. Yeah. And also, honestly, it's a lot of fun to read this comic. But they do get into these heavy topics. Like within this, you also get this sense of despair and like repetitiveness. You know?
Yeah.
This is one of my favorites. He starts using this device more when he gets hit by the brick, like you see a little heart fly out of him. And I think these are kind of falling out of frame again. But yeah, I mean, it is hard not to own these books. And this is the first of many. That's 1 year of work So my main reason, like one of my main reasons for loving Herriman, by the way, there's a cat clock.
Oh,
I don't know if those existed.
Yeah. That was based off of the cat with the Felix, right?
Yeah, and you'll note that I believe, pretty sure Krazy Kat beat Felix by like a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, Felix the Cat was 1926, so this is about the same time.
Nope, predates it. Earlier years, 1918 to 1924. So first year was 1918. Krazy Kat. Sunday pages were collected by Eclipse. So this is the collection kind of continuing from that.
Right. No, I'm not saying it was that Felix came before this, but I'm not saying like Felix wasn't like 40 years later. It was coming out at the tail end of this.
Yeah. It's just there's a lot there's quite a few people who would argue that like Mickey Mouse and Felix are kind of Krazy Kat.
Yeah,
so,
right.
So there's that. I guess that'll kind of do it for the flip through. I do apologize for if this stuff is not translating well on the screen. It
looks good. I mean, a little. It's one of those books I think holding it in your hand is always going to be better. But yeah, it looks awesome.
But I have to say the language in particular, like getting in there and reading through these and seeing just the way that he's intentionally like misspelling words and making plays with phonetics. It's a lot of fun. A lot of fun. But it also isn't like a lot of books at this time would do that, but like in a racist way where they were making fun of some dialect or something.
Right.
In this case, it's literally just characters in Krazy Kat just talk the way like they just talk crazy. And it's a fun language. So yeah.
Well, I think it's time for an adjustment here, and I want to let me. Oh no, the book I was going to do isn't available anymore. Will Eisner, A Dreamer's Life in Comics, is no longer available on Audible.
Oh no!
Okay, I'll do another one. The Eisner one would have been way more appropriate, but this is a good one too. So let me share the screen. Okay, so today's show is brought to you by Audible, and you can get a free. Nope. If I can do this correctly. No, don't remove. Add it to the stream. Go full screen. Okay, there we go. I can do this. I've done this maybe once or twice before. But you can get a free audiobook by going to audibletrial.com/IRS. It won't cost you anything to do that. And if you sign up, then you'll get a free month and a free book, and they give us a little bit of a kickback. But Beneath a Scarlet Sky by Mark Sullivan is a true story, and it is one of the most gut-wrenching books I have read. It is a phenomenal book about a man who grew up as a boy in Italy and sort of kind of fell into being a kind of an underground railroad type of situation for the Jews. Kind of secreting them away through the Alps, away from the Nazis, and then had to join the Italian Nazi army and became a double agent. And it is a true story, and it's incredible, just an incredible thing. And the life that this guy led is amazing. And actually, the author goes through and talks about in the foreword that writing this book kind of saved his life. Took him about 10 years, and he was about to kind of give up on everything until he kind of came across this, and then had some actual interviews with a bunch of the people that were there at the time and really involved. And anyway, phenomenal book. And you guys can get it for free or any other audiobook that you'd like at audibletrial.com/IRS. You can also get the book that Josh is talking about today. And all of those books are available at irsagency.com with links to Amazon that are affiliate links that won't cost you anything extra, but give us a little bit of a kickback. And at irsagency.com, you can also get all of the past episodes, of which there are many, numerous. There are voluminous amount of episodes there. I think I just invented a word. So,
hey, it's a Krazy Kat episode. It's all about inventing words.
Right. Well, that was great. I really liked that. It's fascinating. I didn't know anything about that guy or Krazy Kat prior to this, and so that's definitely something that I'm gonna have to look into.
So let me. I want to hear whether it's of interest to you, but I want to really explain like the sort of impact this has had on me. So, for one, the guy never missed a deadline on a strip. And continually ran a strip for like 31 years.
Yeah.
And here's the interesting, this is a cartoonist legend among cartoonists. When he passed away, it was at his drawing table, and he literally had a week's worth of strips under him. Like he just died on, like he never stopped. He's a legend. He's like a legend in cartooning for that as well. Like, and so because of that dedication to cartooning, he's always been an inspiration to me. And I know that's weird because a lot of people would be like, "Oh, that's depressing to work till you die." But he worked when he didn't have to. Like, he just loved doing this comic. He loved telling this story, and it shows. Like, and one of the things that's great about Krazy Kat is it never dips in quality. He never loses the joy. Like it retains it for years of running this thing.
Yeah. And I think there's a difference between working yourself to death because you have to at a job that you don't like.
Yeah.
Or, like dying doing what you love,
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's awesome.
So that's also a reason that And when I say I'm like really influenced by Krazy Kat, like I'm a nerd. I am a super nerd for Krazy Kat. Like that's
hold on.
tattoo.
We got to go full screen on that.
Yeah,
there we go.
So I
awesome.
do love Krazy Kat. And it's iconic. It's great. It's everything that's great about cartooning. It talks about movement. It's got humor. It's got brilliant paneling. It's got good lettering. It's got good storytelling, and dedication to the craft, non-compromise, and just somehow didn't get screwed by Hearst. I don't know how, because almost every other cartoonist did. But yeah, so anyhow, that's my takeaway. Other than that, like for influence on my own work. I always, like, anytime I feel like I'm getting in a rut for paneling, I pull out McKay or I pull out Herriman, and I start there. Because if I'm doing stuff that's stiffer than this, like that's silly. And I frequently do, because I think the default is to not do this, which is what makes me really appreciate, like, I think there's a huge benefit for all of us as cartoonists and animators to really look at the roots of what we're doing, because sometimes they had advanced in ways that we forget later on.
Right.
So let's not like do the dark ages in comics, So that being said, like, what are your kind of takeaways from it?
I mean, this one of my biggest takeaways is this reminds me of, I started illustration backwards. So like, unlike most people that are very good at drawing, they start traditionally and then maybe shift to digital or incorporate digital or, kind of mix digital into their process. I actually started with an old Cintiq that I bought used off of eBay. And then after about 6 months realized that I needed to like do traditional inks because there's some that's missing. And so I did a deep dive into, not a deep dive, but I got as much as I possibly could, Sergio Tappi and a bunch of out of print books that I would find at used bookstores and online things. Anything that I could get a hold of that where I could look at the actual line work. And that was where I started collecting original pages and things like that. And so to me, this looks like one of those things that would belong in that portion of my library where I need to like really dive in. And I don't know how many people do this, but like spending significant amount of time, like reverse engineering professional work is one of the best ways to like learn. And so I would love to, if you read it as a reader, I'm sure it's enjoyable. If you study it as a craftsman, you're going to get another level. And just at the brief glances that I got, I would be very interested in taking a look at like the craftsmanship and the decisions in value, and proximity and alignment and repetition and those type of like basic foundational, like Gestalt based design principles that kind of help everybody understand like the visual lexicon. It seems like he had all that down in spades. And I bet I would learn quite a bit about inking just from looking through that stuff, just based on what I saw so far. So that's probably the biggest thing that I would be interested in.
I love it. Cool. Yeah. And I definitely think there's a couple dudes and just a couple early folks like in cartooning that are just worth looking at, like with fresh eyes, and it can be really interesting. Also, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, there were like later cartoon adaptions of Krazy Kat, and some of them are pretty amazing, and some of them are terrible. But it's still interesting. Even the ones that are terrible, it's interesting to see kind of what a phenomenon this thing was. So
yeah. Well, that's great.
I love it.
Okay, well, Josh, where can we find your stuff?
You can find my stuff on Amazon by searching for 2 stories by Joshua Kemble. That's Kemble. And that'll take you to my book, which will, cost a ridiculously low amount of money right now. And then if you want to see links to that or any other places to get that comic or other work of mine, go to joshuakemble.com. Corey, where can everybody check out your work and your Gestalt animations?
You can check out my stuff at CoreyKerr.com. And if you go to CoreyKerr.com/online, it'll have the most recent stuff. But really quick, if anybody has a chance to do this, I'd really appreciate it. Go to my Instagram and go leave a comment and a thumbs up and a bookmark on this guy, because I just kind of pumped that out over the weekend, and I would like Wacom to know that their investment was worth it. So that would be the best thing that you guys could do for me. So
sweet.
And we're doing an after party in a few minutes on Josh's channel, so stay tuned for that. If you don't know what channel that is, then you can go to Joshua Kemble on YouTube and just kind of search that, and it will show up. I'm going to take my name off the thing here, and we'll be doing that. We'll be doing that in a few minutes. And go check out irsagency.com. Next week, I totally forgot what we're doing, so let me check the website here. But we announce our shows at the beginning, at the bottom of this page every week. And so if you go to irsagency.com, you will see past episodes here, so you can watch previous episodes, and then upcoming episodes. We're going to cover Grant Morrison and Sean Gordon Murphy's Joe the Barbarian next week, which is a really fun premise. Basically, this kid is a diabetic, and some bullies steal his kind of stash of food that he had, and so he goes into a diabetic coma, and the entire, not actual coma, but the entire comic takes place in his home as he is beginning to hallucinate, trying to make it to the fridge to grab a soda. And you've got this incredible war that happens in his imagination and the landscape of the home and the landscape of the hallucinations match each other. And it is incredibly well done. And actually one of the comics that Sean Murphy seems to have, he hates quite a bit that he made, but it's one of my favorites of his. And so we'll be covering that next week.
Awesome. I'm excited. All right, cool. Well, I guess we'll see you guys on the after party, and that'll be on my channel. So,
okay.
Till then.
See you in a few minutes.